When I thought about this presentation, I thought about all the things that happen on sites and how do we go out and avoid hitting these misfortunes that come and hit us. And I was trying to think of like the good news and the bad news. And the good news is, well, let's start with the bad news. The bad news is reliability is just really hard work. You have to do all of this stuff very, very intentionally. You have to design, build, test, repeat, and it has to be an ongoing process forever. The reason is because lots of stuff is changing behind the scenes. The volumes of data that you have, the technology that you have, versions of progress, versions of other applications that you have out there. And your business is changing, it's evolving. Something that wasn't important before may now be important. So if you're not continuously looking at this, you're not gonna know what needs priority. And it's a big case of prioritization. Whenever there's reliability issues, you have to decide what's more important. And because if you're gonna run an absorbed system and you have less resource, who's important? Is it the manager running the report, or is it the people taking the orders? I think I know which one that one is real easy. I want my people taking orders, I'll figure out the reporting of it later. So you need to have that, and it needs to be stated. That way the manager who can't run his report doesn't feel slighted when the reliability issue happens. We've made a conscious decision that you don't get to work today. You're going to do something else. You may be on the phone answering and getting orders because we can't put them in as fast as we could. So that's what we want to do. So there's got to be good news. Well, there's not really good news. The bad news and the other bad news is misfortune is mostly bad luck. You do things right. We're all relatively smart. We all make relatively good choices, and we try to make choices that are the best for our organization. And when you do that, you're gonna buy reliable-ish hardware. You're gonna buy reliable infrastructure. You may not have thought of everything, and that's okay, but the stuff you have should be reliable. Unfortunately, things just happen. So disks fail. And disks used to fail a lot in the old days. Then they got really reliable. Now they're super uber reliable because now they're solid state. No one should be buying anything that spins aside from a fan in a computer these days. There should be nothing that spins in there. So make sure that you just go out, and if you're buying drives, you're buying solid state. It's 2019. They don't cost that much of a premium anymore. And the reliability that you get and the performance that you get well outweigh that additional cost. So let's look at what the most likely misfortunes to befall you are. A bad disk. All the disks are really reliable, except the ones you chose, of course, because those are going to be the ones that have the bad one in it. Because they always say, yeah, there's 1 in a million that's bad. I don't know why I always get that 1 in a million, but I think I do. Fire. Generally, the fire, has anyone been in an FM 2000 release? When the FM 2000 release is in a computer room? It's really exciting. And I don't ever want my day to be exciting. What happens is that this powder falls out of the sky and it covers everything and gets in every case, every fan, everything. So the fire's the least of your trouble. I wish the damn thing burned and I would just throw it out the door. There was one time I was at Sun, I was doing a benchmark, and there was a terminal sitting on top of a rack, and I saw it start smoking. So I grabbed it and I ran to the back door and I threw it out the back door. And I ripped the cords right out. And somebody goes, "Why'd you do that?" I said, if I didn't, there's going to be an FM 2000 release and we were going to be here for 3 days vacuuming the insides of computers. So that's the bad part. So these fire suppression things are great, but you're most likely, if your fire suppression goes off, you're most likely going to lose your computer room at least for a few days to clean up the mess. So look out for that. Earthquake, we live on a place, you know, maybe not here in Florida, but people in California, they really know about earthquakes. So bad employees, they might not be bad employees, they might just be, well, I put generally trying to be helpful, but. And what it is I've lived through people who have done the RM-R/*, you know, and deleted a whole file system and then said, oh, shoot, try to hit Control-C as fast as they can. They're trying to do the right thing. They just didn't think before they acted. So let's make sure. And then good hackers, the hackers always seem to be better than my employees, so that's a problem. But we need to think about all of these different things that can happen to us, and a lot of this stuff has nothing to do with the technology. A lot of this stuff has nothing to do with that. It's how we run our business. Do we go out there and script things rather than allow people to do things right at the command line? And I can't tell you how many times people mistype commands, and especially when situations are tense. So if you're going along and you have a outage, people tend to get typing very, very quickly without thinking, and they hit return before they ever check what they typed in. So it's very, very important to make sure that everything you have is scripted out there. And we'll talk about that. Reliability goals. We want to ensure against corruption of data, ensure against loss of data. There's two different things, corruption of data and loss of data. Those are two separate things. We want to go out and run despite failures. And Progress has tried to make that easier for us by having replication that we can switch over without having to shut down. So they will have replication, and we'll be able to switch from a target to a host without having to have any outage. So that will greatly reduce the amount of outage time if we have to roll from our primary system to our replica. When you have to recover from an incident, there's two goals. Lose the least amount of data and lose the least amount of processing time, because both of those cost money. They cost lost revenue or they cost increased expense. So even if you can regather that data, even if you can recapture that data, and there's many places that you can't, you have to think about that cost. And I have one client that they have a figure for that amount of time. Every minute they are down, it costs $10,000. The first minute costs $100,000, but every minute after that costs that much. That's for a planned or unplanned outage. So when we plan downtime, we plan it to the minute because it's very expensive. But they have tens of thousands of users and they have tens of thousands of customers. So they want to make sure that they can serve those customers as well as possible. And we have ways of making that a little bit cheaper by running in kind of different modes, but it's still very expensive. And then we want to make sure that we secure our data from misuse, especially those people who have compliance issues like with Social Securities or other HIPAA information or things like that, healthcare information. Corruption of data. Human error is the largest cause of data loss by far. It's way, way, way higher than disk corruption, than something happening on a controller, way higher. So we need to make sure that we have security so we don't allow people to do the RM-R*. We need to make sure that our testing policies are comprehensive, that when we put something in, I can't put a piece of code in unless some other human being has seen it. I want to make sure that there's always a check and balance for everybody. Even the most competent programmer is going to go out there and write a piece of bad code every so often. So you want to make sure that that gets tested in an environment where if the data gets corrupted, it's not a big deal. And it's like I go out there and I write a piece of code really quick to fix something. And all of a sudden I change everybody's last name to Smith. How do you undo that? How do you go back and undo that? With after imaging, you'd be fortunate enough to be able to roll forward to a point in time just prior to that incident happening, but it would still cause a lot of havoc in your environment if you did that. Scripting all administrative functions. There should be no administrative functions that are typed in by hand at the command line. It should only be able to enter one way, and if they're wrong, it says you're wrong. If they type it in the right way, it works. So it gets tested the same way as your production code, and it gets tested the same way. Hardware failure, it used to be disks, now it's fans. Fans fail all the time, and then you get overheating messages, and then you get absorbed cores, and everything starts going in a snowball at that point. Fortunately, most computers you buy today have lots and lots of fans in them. So if you fail one, you can just hot swap it out and put another one in. But make sure that that's a real conscious decision when you're buying hardware, that you're buying redundant fans rather than, it's important to always have redundant disks, but people don't always think about redundant fans. I always think about redundant power supplies as well, because those are the other ones that have they have a fan in them as well. So the power supplies and the fans are the only things that move inside the box anymore. Loss of data. It's going to be a disk failure that's most likely going to get you, but worse to compound that is when you lose your backup. We've tested our backup. They say we've tested our backup. When did you last test it? Last year. Well, how do you know you're getting everything you backed up? How do you know you're getting everything you think you backed up? Well, we look at the logs. How often do you look at the logs? Never. Because they never look at the logs. They say, we get it if it's an error. But someone didn't make the right programming, so they didn't get the error. So it's very important to make sure that you're testing your recovery strategy on an ongoing basis. And we'll talk more about that. But it's really, really important because most people don't test their backup procedures and more likely their recovery procedures very often. And it should be at least annual. And really, you should do a restore of all of your databases at least quarterly, because the cost is so high if you get it wrong. So you need to make sure. Loss of machine, it could be a machine, a power failure, or a network failure. A lot of people now are putting redundant network connections in, so because the internet's so important to their business, they run parallel internet links. I had a client who did this. They ran parallel internet links. And one day a trucker drove into the telephone pole out in front of their building. Turns out that both wires were going across that same telephone pole. They had to rewire across the field and back of them after that. But it was a hard lesson for them to learn because they thought they had done everything right. But there was a single point of failure, and it was that telephone pole. So power failures, making sure that you have generators that run, that you have fuel in, that have been tested, those are important. I have a generator at my house. It goes on at 3 o'clock every Friday. I know, it scares the cat like crazy. He comes running around the house when it comes on. But you know what? I know that my generator is going to work when I need it. So, and I'm probably a little crazier than most people because my generator runs on natural gas, but it has a propane backup. So I have a backup for my backup. But I also have computers in my basement that need to be running. And if they're not running, that would be a bad thing. And I live in New Hampshire where it snows a lot. So it's a good idea to have, and we have a really crummy electrical grid. So having a redundant power source in my house is a smart idea. Loss of location. A lot of people don't think about losing their location. And this was a huge thing after big hurricanes here in this country. What happened is they didn't know where to find their people. People were so dispersed, they didn't know. They didn't have a place to call. So if you go out there and you don't have call lists that have everybody's cell phone number and you don't have all that information, that's really fun. Then you do have no way of getting back in touch and getting in touch with those key resources that you need to get your business back up and running. Even if you say, yes, we have a second location in a regionally different location. Great. How do they get there? Who sends them there? Whose decision is it? So all of that stuff has to be made in advance. So I look at all these things that could happen: a fire, a flood, a natural disaster like a hurricane. Zombie apocalypse was just there for making sure we all were still reading. Understand everything that makes up your system. And this is really difficult work because it's really easy to forget things. What you need to do is you need to go step by step through every process. And I went to a PC. That PC was connected to our network. That network had routers involved. Those routers had wires connected to them. All of that stuff you need to know to be able to run your business. All of that stuff has to be in place. And the problem is it's very, very siloed at most businesses. You have network guys who understand the network but have no idea about the servers. You have Windows guys who know Windows but know nothing about Linux. You have all these different people who know all these different things. They need to sit at the same table and say, this is what's important to me. And here's the group that I'm serving, and this is why it's important. You have to stand up for your technology and make sure that you're going to be able to be supported. So applications that you have in place. Most people don't just have a Progress app. They have a Progress app. They might have an Oracle app. They might have something that does their EDI. They might have something else that does, their handheld devices, all that stuff. Everything that you have out there needs to be on the list. And it can be said that it's not important. We're not going to make it redundant, but it has to at least be on the list. So you can say, I made a conscious decision that we're not going to care about that. Telecom is one of the things that most people forget, is that they put the phone system in, and I was at Progress when the Verizon guy cut our phone system. And how he cut it is he cut it with a chainsaw. We had a trunk in the ground, and we were moving into a building, and another company was moving out of the building. And he was supposed to cut the line for the other people, and he did. Unfortunately, he cut our line as well. And that's not something you can just piece together in a few minutes. We actually rolled everybody out on their cell phones, and we returned support calls that way. And this is at the time when not everybody had a cell phone, and some of them were attached to cars. So you had to go sit in a parking lot and make tech support calls. But it worked. Other things that you have out there, printers, especially any specialty type printers that you use, those are really important because everyone says, oh, the label printers, we have that and it's from 1827, and you need to make sure that you have two of those 1827 printers because that one's going to die at some point. They are built like horses, and they do run like horses, but eventually they're going to die. So make sure that all of the printers, handhelds, all the other peripheral things that you have out there are also accounted for. Like I said, there's no shortcuts to this. You have to just run end-to-end testing. And generally, it's better if you have one person walking through the steps, and that's the person who actually does it for a living. And then you have another person documenting the touch points. And when they do that, you're going to get an example. And I ran down some of this before, but you want to say login, PC, network, server, email. Those are all the things that are involved with just logging onto your network and what you need to have for that. And then these would have to be blown out a little bit more. I'm giving you a very high level: application software, database, associated software, application run reports, printers. So you have to have the inputs, the outputs, and everything else. And you also need to say, I need to have a telephone. I need to have my EDI up. I need to have the internet. I need to have those things because we can't run our business without them. And again, you can say you don't care at any of these. That's okay. But you want to make sure that you're in a room and you say it out loud, because otherwise it doesn't count. So designing a plan, be inclusive. You need the people from the business, you need technical people, any other stakeholders, and then the money people. Money people are really, really important in this because they understand how much stuff costs. They understand how much it's going to cost you to be out for an hour. So they can be the ones who can say, I'm going to give you this much budget to save us this much downtime. And it becomes easier. And it makes the decision-making process easier for you, because I don't know what's important, and I don't know how important it is. I just know that I want everything to stay up. So that would be very, very expensive. The money people are going to go, we don't care if we don't have phones. Everything comes in on the internet. We don't care if the phones go down. So you don't need to have redundant phones, but you do need to have redundant internet. So that's how you get that. And then be complete. Backup, reliability, security. You have to think about all of those things when you're doing these things. So not only do I have it so it's secure and redundant, it's reliable, but if it does happen to fail, I have a way, and I have a documented way to move forward. I have a documented way of being able to restore that into operation. And everybody knows what the expectations are. You have defined service level agreements with the business. Now, here's the main things are cost. They all really come down to cost. But you have to also say, how do we run without a system? And I said we ran without a phone system by running on cell phones. That worked for us. May not work for you. How to run without the system? You may be able to go to paper. I have clients who can go to paper. I find it hard to believe, but they actually do go to paper. So that's okay. But making sure that, okay, I go to paper. Now what do I do after we come back and we're live? How do I get that paper into the computer system? That needs to be documented as well. So how to communicate the issue? That's making sure that the people in the field know what's happening and they know what to expect. And that will keep them from calling you. That's the benefit, is you don't want them to call you and say, system's not up. I know the system's not up. We call you, we call out, we have our service center call everybody and say, we're out, we're going to be up in 20 minutes. And then they know, and they know not to call. And that's the best thing. And then the cost of the solution. You don't want to build $1 million solution for a $10 problem. If it's a $10 problem, you can't spend more than $9.99 to solve it. So application reliability, redundant hardware. Everybody should be having mirrored disks everywhere. You should have, or RAID or whatever you're going to be doing. We used to always talk poorly of RAID 5, but now with SSD drives, it's almost okay to use them in most cases. It's still not the best case scenario, but it's more okay to use them than it was in the past. Data replication. Database files are important. What people don't think about is all the other files that make up your application. Because if your users can't log into their Unix account and see their files, or log into their Windows account and see their files, they're going to be picking up the phone and calling you. So you need to make sure that all of that stuff has redundancy built in, and it has a way that we're replicating it. And it can be as simple as an rsync script, or it can be that you can do something remote mirroring with someone like EMC's remote mirroring. So it can be a very, very elegant, easy to implement solution, but generally those are more expensive. The ones that are cheaper are the ones that you write the code yourself. But again, then the onus is on you to make sure that code works, not on a vendor. Replicated machine. You don't have to go all the way down the road of running progress replication. You could just have a separate machine that you restore to once a day, and that's good enough. And it's cheaper to implement. You can just do it. It's there. It's in another building, and you've done the least you can do, and that's great. But it's better than most, because most people don't have the replicated machine, or they have the replicated machine sitting about this far from the primary machine. And then the replicated environment is, I have a co-location. And a lot of our clients now have to have co-location because of compliance. So their compliance officer says, no, we have to have everything, it has to be the same. So when they run, but now it's somebody else's job to figure out how we make everything the same. Because they want, click, magic happens. Well, magic doesn't happen. It's all of that thought process leading up to it, but replicating the environment in a physically different location. Recoverability. Who's responsible for backup and recovery? Both backup and recovery. It's generally going to be different people. And if it is the same person, you need to make sure that someone's checking in on them and making sure that that recovery process works. I found that using the manager who knows the least about the system as the test bed, if you've written a recovery plan that a manager can execute without human interaction, you've written a very, very good recovery plan. Because smart guys can generally figure stuff out and do it. I don't want anyone to figure stuff out, especially in my recovery process. So I want people to be automatic. There's just this. You log in, you do this, you do this, you do this. And that's how we get there. What gets backed up? When does it get backed up? And why does it get backed up? And everyone says, why do you put why? We need to be able to recover. Well, no, there's also a bunch of other things that you back up for. You back up for to be auditable. The IRS in this country wants you to have 7 years worth of your data available to them at their request. And if you don't have a backup that you can restore, that you can recover from, then you're in deep trouble. So what you need to do is you need to have a conscious decision of how you're going to do that. So testing, unit testing quarterly is what I was talking about before, and then a full test at least annually. And that's a full, I'm going to restore the whole kit and caboodle. I'm going to restore everything. My databases, my side software, everything. And I want this to be the test to say, what's my worst case scenario? How long is it going to take me to recover if I have to go out, find my tapes, and then put them in a machine and get them restored? That's your worst case scenario. But if it works, it's a lot better than it not working. Okay, who's responsible? Who makes the call to go to backup? Because it's important. Someone has to make that call. There's going to have some data loss there, and that person has to be responsible for that decision to do that. Who executes the backup? Who executes the recovery? Who gets notified when? And then call lists must be kept current, all the call lists that you have, and they must be used every time. I don't care if it's a 5-minute outage, you want to make sure that you call those people anyway. It may cost you a little bit in the short run, but that time that you have the bad incident and you need to tell them it's an hour long, they're going to be much more receptive to that call than they were before. So don't only call when it's horrible. Just call when it's kind of bad too. Automate the process. Eliminate human error. I said if you type it wrong, it doesn't work. There's no way to type it wrong and it work or partially work. Single end-to-end, do not have a single end-to-end script. I've done this before, and somebody wanted to have a push button. Let me just restore the system. And what happens is something small happens at step 23. And then you have to go back and try to figure that out. So you're better off doing it in blocks. Take a block, do that. Take another block, do that. And the best thing is, with doing it by blocks, you can then go look at the log files that you're creating with those, and that gives you assurance that you're actually getting done what you think you're getting done. And then you don't have to backtrack 10 steps if something goes wrong. So it makes a lot of sense to do that. Document everything. Because the person who knows anything is going to be on vacation, and they're going to be in Belize on an atoll where they have power 2 hours a day, and not the 2 hours that you want them to have power. So what you need to do is know it needs to be easy enough that anyone can execute it. So that's what the goal there is. And I've had a client that's actually done this twice. And both times, the person who knew about how to recover the system was out of reach. And they were able to recover without him, which I thought was wonderful. So remember to document all the decision points, though, because if there's a decision point there and you have just Joe user doing the recovery, I want Joe to call and talk to the person responsible and say, should I do this or should I do that? If there's any tree decision that that person needs to make, you make sure that they know who to call. And generally, I don't put people's names in there. I put a policy name in there, you know, like decision maker A, and then they can look at one thing that I keep up to date, instead of having to go through it and edit all of the documentation and have someone's human name in there. It's way easier to do it that way. Log files, make sure you log as much as you possibly can. I know they get big, I know they get cumbersome, but man, oh man, they are so useful. And the thing is, After this, you're going to get audited. Your auditors are going to come in and say, we need to know if everything restored. And you can say, yes, here you go. And pour this big pile of documentation on them. And they don't actually look at any of that. They just weigh it. And if it weighs enough, then you've done your job. So make sure it's needed for self-audit, it's needed for compliance, and it's also just, it makes me warm and fuzzy inside. Okay, when to back up, or what gets backed up? What gets backed up is your database needs to get backed up frequently, and more frequently than once a day. So how do I back up my database more frequently than once a day? I back up the AI files, so I have a backup file and AI files that I can get us to a much closer period of time. I'm not going to lose a whole day because I've taken my AI files and I've backed them up. So it's really important that you take the important aspects of your system. And I have some clients that they have user documentation files and things like that that are critical to their running. And I make sure that those get backed up on a very frequent basis, sometimes as often as every 15 minutes. So I make sure that that stuff goes off-site too. And it doesn't have to go off to the absolute replica or anything like that. It just needs to go someplace where I can get at it, where it'll still be there if the building falls down. That's all I want to do. So I just want to make sure. It's okay to back things up once a day as long as you're okay with losing a day's worth of data. You just have to be okay. And again, this is why you have the money people there, because they can make that call. Take your transactional AI files and archive them immediately. Every time you do an AI switch. So if you're running AI management and you have your AI management switching every 15 minutes, then have that file get pushed off site. And, and now you can do this cheap. You can just go out there and get S3 from Amazon and just push it to S3, and it goes to some place out there, and it's someone else's responsibility, and that's what you want to do. I have clients now that they have their entire replicated environment on Amazon Web Services, so they have an on-premise deployment, but their replica is on Amazon because they don't have a second location to go to. So instead of having to buy a second location or find some other place to be able to host it, they just said, we can build the same thing on Amazon, we'll just do that and replicate it up there. And it's not hugely expensive. Amount of time it takes to do a full backup is a long, long time in most cases. Now, we've got lots of databases that are terabyte or larger, and those databases take a long time to back up to any removable media. So we just need to make sure that how frequently we can do that. We want to do it at least daily and then supplement that with the AI files out there. Where does it go? Short-term stuff like AI files, they just go to a second location. Long-term stuff or the medium-term stuff, they need to go to some secure and go off-site. So every day, stuff should go off-site somehow. And it doesn't have to go onto a tape, into a truck, over to Iron Mountain. It doesn't have to do that. It can go out of your machine and onto another machine someplace else. That's good enough. But eventually, it needs to be on removable media. And you're going to need that for annual backups. You're going to need that for monthly backups. So you're going to need removable media for that. Do I need removable media for daily backups? No, I don't need it. They can just back it up to something online. Long-term stuff should go to something like Amazon Glacier or just to removable media. Generally, when I do that, anything that I'm going to have something long-term, I get it into some universal format. I don't put a progress backup file out there. I put ASCII files out there. So I'll dump the data out to ASCII files out there. So I'll copy it over to another location, dump it all off, and that'll be my annual backup because I'll have it all in ASCII. And that makes it auditable, it makes it readable from other sources. It makes a lot of good sense to do it that way. So it means that you have to have a deliberate archive policy, not Joe takes it and puts it in the back of his car. I don't know how Joe is, but he's not very good. The why we're doing them, insurance, compliance, and because it feels good. Those are, and the biggest thing is there's no gratification in doing a backup. There's only gratification of being able to restore a backup. And hopefully you'll never, ever need to restore one. So you can go years and years and years and doing backups and get no gratification of it. But just one time and you can restore, boy, does it feel good. And that I know that I can restore makes me allowed to sleep at night. That's the reason I need to do it. So we'll talk about making use of your plan. We'll talk disk failure, a fire in your computer room, and then a hurricane. So kind of escalating failures here. A disk failure. All my disks are mirrored. I'll get a message. So the failure is registered. I get a message to me. Bad disk. I replace it with my spare that I actually have in the rack rather than having to go get one. I replace it. I take the bad one out. I ship it back to Dell. Dell sends me another spare. Bob's my uncle. Nobody knew it happened. That's the kind of disk failure you want to have. You want to have that disk failure because it's easy. If you have a disk failure in your RAID 5 and not mirrored, you're going to be running on an absorbed RAID set. And if you're already pinched on performance and you run on an absorbed RAID 5 RAID set, performance is going to become very, very spotty. And you need to make sure that that spottiness of the performance is accounted for in your recovery plan. And it's okay. Again, it's a decision that you're going to make. I think the cost of mirroring is cheap enough to mirror everything. I don't think I need to go to RAID 5 to get a little bit more disk space from disks. I just don't need that. So I tend to do it that way. No downtime, no data loss. That's the gold standard. Fire in the computer room, FM 2000. It looks really pretty because it's snowing. But it takes time. It takes days. I've never seen anybody clean it up in a day. I've seen people clean it up in multiple days only because you have to find every little tiny crevice in computers. And if you've looked at any of these computers, especially the high density blades now, it is only corners. There's actually nothing straight in there. And you can reach your hands in there and it'll rip your hands off getting in there to vacuum it. So I speak from experience that I've done this and it's not fun. So make sure we go out there and make the recovery call, decide that we're going to go to the second facility. Replication is in place. Now we have to have an outage. We have to actually shut down. So everybody switches over. We have to change some configuration files and we have to stop the target database, make it a source, and start it back up. In 12.2, we won't have to do that. We'll just say, you're now a source. And I don't have to allocate shared memory. I don't have to go out and do anything. All my configurations will change automatically and we'll be off to the races. So that's what we want to do. Now there's minutes of downtime and maybe I would say a half hour of downtime probably, because given the time that it's going to take you to make a decision and do that, it's about a half hour. And then there's little or no data loss. If you have OE replication, there'll be no data loss. People say, well, I'm not using synchronous replication. I don't care. I've run millions of transactions in there, and my transaction loss has never been greater than 3 seconds. So I don't know if I did something in the last 3 seconds, so I'm going to go check that anyway. So, but likely is it's going to be in, but it might not. You might lose seconds worth of time, but not lots of time. Okay, fire in the computer room. This, we have a lot more. It's going to take this. We contact the person. We decide to move to the second facility. Now we have to log into a second half, apply unapplied, because we're not using replication this time. Now we're using AI replication. So I have to go out there and apply these. I have to make sure that I have some procedure for applying these AI files out there. I start the database for processing. So I have a little bit more downtime, but not appreciably more downtime. And that's reasonable. So we just made a decision because it's cheaper to do that than it is to use OE replication. It's a better way of doing it. So hurricane, facilities damaged. Oh, hang on. Fire in computer room, no backup host. This is the worst one that happens. now I have to go, all the first steps are the same. I've called the people in charge, I've gone through, I've decided to go to a second site. I have a long time to clean up. I potentially now have to buy hardware because I don't have a second site available to me. I have to wait for that to get shipped to me, wait to it to get to my facility, wait to it get installed. Then I have time to rebuild the system for backups. Then I'm going to have a week of downtime, likely, in that case. So again, you have to say, if we don't do this replicate environment, we could have up to a week of outage for us to recover. And that tends to get people's attention. That tends to get people on your side of saying a replica is not a bad idea. And you don't have to buy the same size replica as you buy primary. I can buy a smaller replica and only run part of my business, run my core portion of my business. And that's okay too. If it's really that much more money to do it, then run a scale model that has enough storage, but a little less power. Way easier to do. The hurricane. The facility's damaged. Now I have to go out there and contact people. Where do they go? Who do they contact? How do you contact them? All of these things are finding people to gather your troops. People who even know that our second facility is, standing here in Orlando, my second facility is in Nashville. How do I get to Nashville? Somebody's going to have to make that decision that says, get in your car and we'll expense your car ride up there, or take a flight and we'll expense your flight up there. So make sure that your employees have a place to call somebody, and you also have a way of calling out. It's very, very important to have two-way communication that way, and that way everybody knows where everybody else is, because there's enough havoc without knowing where key employees are. Points to remember, it's not a product of luck. All of this stuff is a product of hard, methodical work. And you do it with intention. You do it with the goal of, how much can I save? How much downtime can I get rid of? How much data loss can I get rid of? And if you do that from step one, and you do it with the technical people, the non-technical people, and the money people all in the same room, it makes the process go much, much easier, because everything's known and all the cards are on the table. And people, when the problem happens, are already pre-informed of the decision that's been made. You're not surprising them by saying, our recovery strategy is to go buy a piece of hardware. Because that's what you don't want, because you're going to have people with flaming torches coming into your office. So you want to avoid that. So create real deliverables, be inclusive in terms of the people and what you back up. Scenario-based recovery strategies. Think about machine loss, building loss, or something bigger or something smaller. But think of those kind of scenario-based and have those fully documented. So a person can go through there and it's a rote process. Do block 1, do block 2, do block 3. Done. Test. Really test. Don't say you test. Don't just unit test. End-to-end test. And do the end-to-end for a particular resource quarterly. And you can rotate which ones you do. But if you're at least testing your process quarterly, and then you do the full end-to-end entire system once a year, you're going to be better off than 99% of the people out there. I guarantee you. Any questions? Comments? Go ahead.
What do you use for AI now?
It depends on the client. It's what their SLA is. And you take their SLA and you divide it by half.
I use 720, 2 minutes. I want that AI out there.
Yeah. I don't really go, I don't generally have too many people at the 2-minute range. I have a lot of people at the 15-minute range, because I feel if I'm going to take a loss of an AI file, or I'm going to take a loss where I'm going to have to restore, and I'm going to have to restore my AI files, 7.5 minutes is really a reasonable amount of data to lose. So I'm kind of thinking about, the mean time of failure of that is I'm going to lose it at, the worst case, I'd lose 15 minutes. But it's still, you get to be this huge number of files out there, and what's cost benefit of having, if I have to go recover that, And that's high because when you do each file, it has to go through that recovery pass. And so you can lose time on the restore. It's not as bad as it used to be, but it's still there. There's still some recovery stuff that it does with the BI file because it has to look through those blocks when you get the next AI file. So each one, it has to go read the BI, read the AI, okay, and you're only putting in 2 minutes worth of data. So it could take you 2 minutes to read the BI file. So I think 15 minutes is a much more reasonable number for me. Anyone else? Questions, comments, personal problems? Thank you very much. Let's go eat some lunch.